Has anybody ever said no to you? Is no always a bad thing? Let's find out. Amy Carmichael was born in Northern Ireland in the year 1867. She was the eldest of 7 children, and they all lived in a beautiful home with a big fireplace. Now, Amy loved the colors and the sounds of the ocean near her home. She loved the color blue. Her mother had the bluest of blue eyes, and Amy wanted blue eyes too. Amy had brown eyes. They were sparkly and beautiful, but they were brown. Her family would go to church every Sunday, they'd read the Bible, and they'd pray. Amy was always taught that God answers prayer. Always answers prayer. Now, one night she was kneeling at her bed, and she was praying to God. And she asked God to change her brown eyes into blue. She believed God, and she fell asleep. The next morning, she woke up, hurried out of bed, expecting to see her blue eyes, and she looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were still brown. Nothing happened. Oh. Did God not hear her prayer, she thought? She held back her tears. Now, God did teach her in that moment an important lesson, that sometimes God does say no. Her parents say no once in a while. God always answers prayer. Many years later, Amy would understand why God said no, and she'd be very glad because of it. When Amy grew up, she became a missionary in the country India. She was anxious to learn their language, but the big challenge was learning and understanding how people lived there. You see, Amy wasn't born in India, and she looked very different than the East Indian people. So they treated her like an outsider, unwelcome in their everyday lives. Amy wished that she could disguise herself and walk through the marketplace, but what she really wanted to do was go into those stone temples. But because she was an outsider, they wouldn't let her in. What do they do in those temples, she wondered. She knew they didn't believe in the one true God that created the universe. They believed in made-up gods, idols. She wanted to share God's love with them and tell them that Jesus took the punishment of sin for them as well. But how could she if she didn't understand them? Amy trusted God would show her the way, and he did. Amy figured out how to disguise herself. She used coffee. Yum! She used coffee to stain her arms and her face. In other words, she colored her skin a beautiful brown, a nice brown color. She also wore an Indian sari, which is a long scarf that women wrapped around their bodies like a dress. And sometimes they put it over their shoulders and over their head. Amy smiled. Would her daring plan work? No one would recognize a brown-skinned woman wearing an Indian outfit. Her missionary friends said yes, she looks just like an East Indian woman. They continued, "It's a good thing that you have brown eyes and not blue or green. You'd never pass as an East Indian woman then." Blue eyes? Ding! Amy remembered. She remembered her disappointment as a little girl when God answered no. Now she knew the reason. Her brown eyes were to help her with her work in India. She would never get into a temple as a blue-eyed outsider, but the brown eyes were perfect. One day, she was wearing her Indian disguise and she walked past the priests into the outer courts of a temple. And beside the one tower, she saw a made-up god, an idol, and it had candles all around it. Amy shuddered. Oh, can you shudder? Shudder. She was sad. She was sad because many people worshipped this man-made god. It wasn't even alive. One time she followed a parade. She followed a parade down the road that was going towards another temple. She covered her face with her sari so no one would recognize her, and she prayed for God's protection because she wanted to tell them about Jesus. A wooden cart rolled along the side, and on the wooden cart was an idol, a big statue. It was covered with florals, and there were 10 little girls sitting on the cart as well. Now these girls all had black shiny hair. They wore beautiful purple outfits and bracelets. They had beautiful brown skin, but their eyes were wide with fear. They were scared. Amy watched as the cart drove past the gates into the temple. The gates closed. Amy thought of those children in the temple. She realized they were prisoners. They had been taken from their family and their home. They were sent there to serve the idols and be slaves for the priests for the rest of their lives. They had no choice. But nobody thought this was bad because it was part of their religion. They didn't think it was wrong. Amy thought of those children. Could they get away? Could they escape? She wondered. Where would they go? Without God, Amy knew that she was a poor, helpless Irish woman, unable to fight the power the people's religion had on them. But she knew who her God was. She knew that Jesus loved those children, and she knew that her God was more powerful than any religion. Amy prayed for the children, and the God that answered her prayer for blue eyes so many years ago slowly showed his plan. Could Amy help these temple children? You're going to have to tune in next week and find out what happens.